All right. Welcome, everybody, to the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Galina, alongside my main man, Diante Lee. Diante, how's it going?
Good, man. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about, my seasonal depression dealing with springtime in San Diego. I feel like, we don't get the kind of respect that we deserve when it comes to poor weather.
There was someone who me and Deontay both know posted a picture of himself in San Diego, and there was overcast. Like, I'm sure. What's the weather? What's the temperature like there today?
The high was only 66 degrees.
Okay, so 66 and overcast, and this constitutes seasonal depression for the San Diegoans. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly.
It's rough out here, man.
Yeah, so spring is supposed to be the time for renewal and rebirth, like it is in most of the world except for San Diego. But so we have on the program Ross Dellenger. We just recorded an interview with him talking about all things that are trending in college football right now. Ross is the senior national college football reporter for SI, for Sports Illustrated. So we talked to him about the new practice rules. And what that means is it's a reduction in hitting. Really, that's what it comes down to. The NCAA is saying you can't do Oklahoma drills anymore. You can't do the board drill anymore. Less full pads practices. I think 2 less. I think less scrimmages also. I think 1 less scrimmage too. So they're just really shortening the padded life for a student athlete. So we talked to him about that. We talked to him about all the new national image and likeness, NIL stuff. Talked to him a bit about LSU and Auburn. He was just at Auburn talking to Brian Harsons. We got his thoughts on that. And college football expansion. His latest article is on the padded practices, but he wrote an article before that on college football expansion. Listen, it's coming. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So we talked to him about all that stuff. It's a really good interview, and we'll get to that when we're done here. But first, D, I have some questions for your defensive mind.
Let's get to it.
All right. I wrote an article that should be out on the website by the time people are listening to this, by the time all 13 of you are listening to this.
So the number one pod in Austria.
About Cliff Kingsbury and the Arizona Cardinals offense. And basically my hypothesis, my premise was, even though it looks like a modern offense, in a lot of ways it is. It definitely has some modernity to it. Even though it looks like it is, the air raid is almost outdated already in the football landscape, and how teams have already gone away from being 2 slot receivers on every play, 1 back, no attached tight ends, 1 running back in the backfield. And they've kind of gone back to having a tight end in the core, as we would say, in the core, meaning, part of the kind of offensive line. And sometimes a fullback now, the fullback tight end hybrids are coming back, 11 personnel with a bigger body, so that you can get more, 2 things. And we've talked about this, last week, I think, is 2 things. A, the running game, you can just be more multiple in the run game. That's no doubt. And B, you can protect. Like you don't have to live in the world of crazy protections and always trying to get in the right call when you have more bodies there, because the defense doesn't want to send a million bodies at you. They would like to send as little bodies as possible at you. So if you just protect with as many guys as you can, you're going to help yourselves. So my question to you, Deontay, is, from a defensive perspective, like, why is it that we've gotten to the point where these spread offenses, inside zone bubble, from 2x2 split, from 3x1 split, even empty stuff, why is it just kind of gotten easy to defend?
I think really it does come. I spend so much time talking about this stuff from a philosophical perspective, but that's really where the answer is. So the first thing is, I kind of want to narrow the focus when we're talking about air raid for this conversation to say, like, the Leach variant, the Southern Mississippi variant, the Eastern Carolina variant of the air raid. That's when we're talking about that. That's the one we're saying is kind of like a dying art form in a way. Is it still prevalent? Yes, of course. There are still concepts that are being carried over everywhere. I watch, my heart gets torn out of my chest every Saturday watching USC play this style of offense. So I do see that. I think that, in the conversation that we're having, number one, the reason why I think it's a dying art form is because what we're seeing from offenses is a need to get back to some form of two-back run game, one way or another. And right now, for the most part, it's not like we have a wide spread of a bunch of running quarterbacks or athletic mobile quarterbacks that we want to use in that way. When I say we, I mean the football world in general. So what does that mean? That means that now we've got to take the tight end off the ball, right? Because when the tight end's on the ball, you can only run certain single back runs. You know what I'm saying? So there's zone, your inside zone, your outside zone. You may get like your guard tackle counter or your guard tight end counter. Maybe you get like a tackle wrap play. But your menu is pretty small as far as single back run goes. So what happened in that world at first when we were going to single back stuff, the next evolution offensively was, let's get the quarterback involved in the run game. Boom, what do you know? You get your split action just like your typical two-back run game stuff. And now a defense has to honor you on both sides of the formation, right? Now, again, as we evolve, as defenses adjust and better handle some of these things, it is time to evolve back into, hey, how can we get back to two-back runs and make defenses have to account for the fact that gaps can move beyond just pullers, right? I actually have to key a guy who can be on either end of the formation depending on what the run action is, and where he's at changes what I have to think defensively. So that's, to me, that is the number one thing, is that I don't think the offenses are going to be able to get away with living in a single back run world as often. Teams are just too good now at getting the defensive linemen who can play with technique or just be more talented. And teams are now using schemes where we're just eating up guys on the inside, right? And now I'll put my freak athlete tweener guy as my Mike and Will backers in the box, and they'll just scrape over the top. And your blue chip offensive lineman is never even going to get a chance to touch the guy because he's got to deal with, that guy that's standing in the B gap, So that's really what I think we're looking at. Is it's really just, innovations, or necessity is the mother of innovation, I think is the way the saying goes. That's just where I think we're at. Offenses need to get back to the threat of two-back run game in order to open the creases that you need in the passing game. At first, when every defense, or at least back then when every defense was geared to stop two-back run game, hey, going forward wide makes a lot of sense, right? The seams are open. Take the seams. Defenses now have adjusted to say, let's deny the seams again. Okay, then we need to get back at punishing defenses in the crease, in the alley, getting to that C-gap area, kicking guys out, having the threat of cutbacks, breaking for long runs. And now defenses have adjusted to that. Hey, we're not going to give you these creases and alleys anymore because out of the scheme and the fronts that we're in. So get back to two-back run game, more gap scheme, get more downhill, force defenses to have to account for that again. It's just a, give and take.
I think one of the things, I've talked about this before, this past 6 months since the Mike Leach Mississippi State era commenced, is the defense, and I don't think it was necessarily put in, the defense didn't evolve to this because of the air raid guys, but what ended up happening was all of a sudden now the defense is playing back to a 3-4 look. And what they're doing is they're closing the B gaps by alignment, right? Now you have three players who are inside the two tackles. So you have a nose and you have the two, defensive ends inside the tackles. So what Leach and the air raid guys want to do is say, hey, you're in a 4-down front. You have a bubble. There's a B gap. One of the two B gaps is going to be open, and we're going to hit that. And we had remember we had Mike Tyson, former offensive line coach, former head coach in the NFL, talking about, hey Mike, what do you want to do when you're designing a run game? Hey, we're going to try and hit the B gap until it bursts. Like we are going to hit that until it bursts. And they could get away with that for so long because that's how teams played it. Now all of a sudden in the tight front era, there's no B gaps. So now the defense is laughing because they can play with three defensive linemen. You can go spread all you want. They're going to play with three defensive linemen. They're going to drop 8 in coverage. So when they drop 8 in coverage, what does Mike Leach say? Well, we're going to check to a run. That's the one time we're going to check to a run. If you drop 8, we're going to check to a run. But now you check to a run, they don't have a lot of runs. They have inside zone, they have draw. You're looking for the B gap, it ain't there no more. So like just kind of by chance, defenses have moved to this type of scheme, and it's just flustered. I think specifically, the two that I think about, obviously, Mississippi State last year, awful season, absolutely awful season. Teams dropped 8 every single play against them. They had no answer. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with, poor offensive line. I think they did a little better when the backup quarterback came in, to place KJ Cassell, it's Will Rogers, so there was some issues, but I think there's a lot riding on this year for Mississippi State. And the other team is USC, where, I don't know if they could afford to have all these teams drop 8 against them. And that's a team that has better skill players than the teams that they're playing against, and they still had trouble. And it's, for me, it goes back to the same thing. When I drop, and there's millions of other offensive idiot coaches out there like me, when we go on the board and we draw up a concept, we draw it up against 7 people dropping. Because those create spaces. Like, we want to look at that and see players open on the whiteboard, and that's tough to do when you're drawing up against 8 men dropping. And there's a million different ways you can drop 8. So I think it's like the air raid's kind of, this defensive scheme has kind of caught up to it, and then we're seeing, like you said, a return to two-back stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that this is actually a big feature in Urban Meyer's offense, at least when he was at the college level, is that he was able to find explosiveness within his offense without having elite passing talent. And that's what having, the quarterback being a potential second back as a threat, that's what it will do for you. He's not a 2-back run game guy, but if you've got to honor the quarterback on all these different run schemes for all intents and purposes, you have to defend it as though it's a 2-back offense. And this is something philosophically that he's carried. We talked with Willie Corn at Coastal Carolina. What was really the most explosive thing about their offense was the pass game. Well, why is that so? Because the quarterback can actually punish you, and they have a true option phase of their offense that you have to honor as well. And when you get into your 2-back run game world, when you get into the option phase of your offense, I can say defensively, there are only so many answers in the book that exist. Can you run whatever you want? Of course, but you better know who's got what, It's not enough to just say, we're going to play cover 3 against a zone read team. Okay, it's cover 3, but who's got the quarterback? Are you using the end to buy 2 for 1? Are you scrape exchanging with the backer? What does that mean for coverage, et cetera, et cetera? So that's really what I think we're dealing with. It's going to be interesting to me to see whether or not college offenses, now that we're coming into the era of RPO mastery, where even bad teams are able to move the ball with RPO, I'm interested to see if defenses get more into man, get more into single high again, if that's the next evolution. And when that happens, will these offenses go to an entirely new package of offense? Or are they going to say, we're keeping the RPOs because we like them, but now we're going to go back to undressing the quarterback a little bit and putting him in a position where he's going to have to decide whether or not he's keeping it or, throwing some bubble or doing the Auburn thing where a guy's running like a fake fade or hitch and he's running to the sideline and then just dumps it off really quick. So again, all these layers just come back to that chess match between what do defenses actually have to respect from the offense and what kind of respect does the offense actually demand of the defense.
Yeah, I think we talk about the quarterback run game as part of the air raid. When I think about having just watched a bunch of Cardinals tape, it's like, Cliff and Kyler came in together. So there was no doubt that he was going to put in all this stuff. And their run game has been pretty good. And it's probably what's keeping them at least league average, which is kind of what they've been the past 2 years in terms of efficiency, is the fact that they can do a lot of really cool stuff with Kyler Murray in the running game. And I think that's really, it's not really fair to say, hey, well, let's see what Cliff could do with a non-mobile quarterback, because that's who he has and that's the offense that he's designed. But it would be interesting to see someone try to do all this spread stuff with not Kyler Murray, honestly, because they can get away with some stuff. And I think the other thing is, we look at what offenses are trendy in college football right now, going back to college football. And we've talked about this so much. It's the 2-back super spread.
Yep.
Because they know that all these concepts that you've created on defense to stop the quote unquote air raid and spread. Well, man, like we've been saying, if I get two backs in there, now I change the run game. And if you're going to play in too high, and that's what they love you playing in too high, because they're just going to run the ball down your face with a big fullback. A lot of these teams have a big burlier fullback. I'm thinking about the Baylor teams back in the day with a very big, a 6 offensive lineman in there. At Auburn, doing the same thing. It's a little different offense, but they play with a big fullback there too. So I think that's where it's like, in response to defenses kind of spreading themselves out and getting lighter because of the spread era, the inside zone bubble spread era. Well, we saw it at Baylor for all those years, and then we're seeing it everywhere else now. It's like, hey, we're going to beef up. We're going to spread you to your limits, and we're going to beef up inside so we can run a bunch of different stuff in the run game.
And if you really just look at it, the way that hiring has happened as far as head coaches and offensive coordinators tracks with this. Outside of Graham Harrell, there's really not another young guy, that's running the Leach variant of the air raid to a T. Do teams keep elements of it? Of course, but there are a lot of guys who come off of that air raid tree who have diverged. Gundy has gone in a completely different direction. He was never really true air raid, but it's clear that he has a certain belief of the threat of the run game. Same with Lincoln Riley.
That's the best example, I think, is. Yeah.
So, all these guys that are off the air raid tree clearly have taken evaluation and taken stock of what they want to do offensively and realize that if we're playing with 4 wide, to me, it's just the same as saying we're playing 4 down cover 3 like Ohio State. Can you do it? Of course, till you're blue in the face. But the truth of the matter is the way that the sport is being played right now, you are limiting your answers if something goes wrong. And I think that now, we are in an era where it's really not about how strong your strength is. It's about how weak your weaknesses are. And the more you expose yourself, the easier it is for all of these genius offensive and defensive coordinators who spend all week stealing from each other anyways to figure out exactly what it is that's going to make you bend and eventually break. So I would not be surprised if, a guy like a Graham Harrell, because he's young, maybe tries to incorporate something a little bit newer. For a guy like Mike Leach, I'm sure he's going to go down with the proverbial ship. That's just kind of what he is and who he's been. But even if you go back to like the Hal Mummy days, when he was at Kentucky, all that stuff is based out of 2-back. So the ability to do that is there. It's just a matter of, what is it exactly that you're trying to get out of the offense? And there is a value in spreading it out as much as possible. Cliff Kingsbury is the person who set off this conversation that we had earlier today. I think that there's a reason why the Cardinals are so divergent from the rest of the league when it comes to how they line up. And they have been effective with the run game because they have a threat as a runner at quarterback. So they kind of are able to approximate 2-back run stuff with Kyler. But like you said, if that were not the case, I think that we would be talking about Cliff even more harshly than I think some people do if he did not have a quarterback like Kyler Murray to be able to threaten the run game as well.
It's interesting because one of the issues is when you play this type of offense, and to me, it's the craziest thing that I've ever seen is the past 2 seasons, you talk about having answers for stuff. It's like they don't have an answer other than let's say they want to run inside zone or whatever. They want to loosen, they're getting an overhang, a Sam linebacker or a nickel who's creeping into the box or in trips, the mic is creeping into the box. Their only answer is to throw a damn bubble screen to Larry Fitzgerald, because that's just how the offense is set up. Like there's just not enough answers for that type of stuff. Now they could easily just move their receivers around, like Cliff, it's the NFL, please. But yeah, that's like, they just don't have answers. I will say, you're talking about Hal Mummy. Matt Mummy is the OC at Nevada. And I will say it's funny because we talk shit about the air raid, but if you watch Nevada, they run it well. So it's like, it's funny. It's like, I tweeted this like a month ago when I was watching Nevada, but it's like, when I'm watching Mississippi State, I'm like, oh, it's over. The air raid's done. You can't run it anymore. And then you put on the Nevada tape and it's like, oh my God, this is the best offense I've ever seen.
Right. I want to go to a clinic for this.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the last thing I'll say is just, we talk shit about the air raid and it's fun because it's hilarious sometimes when it looks bad and it like it did at Mississippi State last year and sometimes at USC and sometimes in Arizona. It's hilariously bad because, again, you're throwing bubble screens to Larry Fitzgerald. But we have to put context on the air raid, and everyone is running the air raid when you think about it in terms of the concepts that people, the four verts and the Y cross and mesh. And like, this is all stuff that were popularized, and no one knows where concepts are originated from, or like originally. And, hell, Mummy and Leach went to, what was it? The guy, Lavelle Edwards, I believe.
Lavelle Edwards. Yeah. He was from,
So like no one knows where the stuff is originally from, but like they took those concepts, they made it their thing, they put it in part of their package, and then it becomes popular. And now everybody in the world is running this stuff. So like we have to give credit where credit's due to the air raid in terms of the actual past concepts. The problem is, and I wrote this in my article, the problem is when you put all this stuff together, especially at the NFL level, when you're four wide, when you're running hurry up, when you're not moving your receivers around, when you put individually, no problem with any of that. You put it together as one package, and it's the air raid package, and that's kind of where the issues are, I think.
I think that, you hit the nail on the head, because I was going to say quiet is kept. If you guys want to watch tape on a perfect version of the air raid, it's 2019 LSU. If you really want to talk about, we're going to have a handful of plays that we run. We're going to play from the spread, even though Thad Moss would obviously be attached to the core as well. But the way he was used is basically like the second back in the original air raid, chip and then release into the flat. Same with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the way he was used. And what happened when you get a light box, we'll hand it off to our running back. And now our running back looks like a potential first-round pick because he's always running in light boxes. Because this team that is basically running the air raid is hitting you with these over routes and all of these deep 9 balls and these skinny posts and these glance routes until, you can't take it anymore. So the air raid, it sounds corny to say, the air raid is not just a scheme. It really is a philosophy. It's an approach to offense. The same as the West Coast. It's basically just a really baby version of the West Coast offense without, all the modularity that comes with the West Coast. But that's really the same philosophical perspective. We want to get the ball to the open space in the field as quickly as we can get the ball out there, however we need to from whatever formation alignment. It's just that the air raid has chosen to do that by opening the playbook or opening the space on the field as much as they possibly can. But it can be done. It can certainly be done. I just think that we need to continue to evolve our understanding of these schemes and not think just that the air raid means that I've got to have 4 actual receivers on the field, 1 guy on each hash mark, 1 guy on each set of numbers, and we're running 4 verts and Y cross all day.
And I think when you brought up Lincoln Riley before, it really is the best example of how you can modernize the air raid, because they're still running the same stuff, running mesh, running Y cross. He's got some new stuff that he's put in for sure. But he's doing it from different sets, and he's doing it in a way that he doesn't, even though he had, Baker could move a bit. Kyler could definitely move. Jalen Hurts could definitely move. Spencer Rattler could move. Like they could move. I'm not saying that, but like he could do it with different quarterbacks where you don't have to always involve them in the running game, which is exactly what you're talking about. We can put in, he had these big tight ends. He had these big fullbacks. He was playing 21 personnel. He was playing 12 personnel. And then still getting into those classic air raid concept. So I think that's kind of, and again, we go back to the same thing often, but that's football now. It's protecting with a lot of guys to create deep shots, just like we saw with Alabama, just like you talked about LSU 2019, and so many other teams who are running this type of offense. Like we talked about last week with Nate Tice, like how do you get people open? Two ways to throw the ball down the field. Either you do it like we're talking about, where you protect with 7 and you run these crossers across the field and you give your quarterback time to throw the football, or you kind of do what these super spreader teams do, and you say, we're not really going to get the receivers open per se down the field, but we're going to make sure that there's no negative plays that can happen. And we're just going to throw 9 balls down the sideline the whole game. And if we catch 3 out of 9 in a game, that's fine for us. And if we catch 5 out of 9, then we're winning the game by handily. So like that, I think, is the kind of the two philosophies, but it goes back to what we kind of originally started saying, is to do those two things. Teams have gotten back into having bigger players on the field.
Yep. And I mean, my last comment on it is that, again, evaluate the coaches and where they come from. We won't mention the guy who was at Baylor, but he came from the air raid tree. Yeah. All right. He did come from the air raid tree. Same for Lincoln Riley. These guys come off the air raid tree and they go elsewhere, or they study something else and realize that philosophy does apply to all of these different other approaches to offense, and having the threat of the run game, and not only just the threat of the run game, meaning like we can get 4.5 yards, but we can actually go get a 25-yard run just off of the design. Not necessarily that, hey, the defense is dropping 8. They've got safeties 22 yards deep playing cover 2 man. No, like you can actually design an effective, explosive run game and have a handful of passes and be able to get to these things out of all these different looks. And the second you get the advantage you want and the space that you want, you can get back into playing old school air raid offense.
All right. Stay tuned for our interview with Ross Dellenger. We now have the privilege of welcoming to the PFF College Football Podcast, Mr. Ross Dellenger, head national college football writer for Sports Illustrated. Ross, welcome to the program.
Hi, good to be on, guys.
So Ross, you've been around now. You are the national college football guy at SI, big deal. But you've been around through different college football teams, through the programs. Can you take us through your journey that led to you being the national guy now?
Well, mostly got lucky. That's what this world is all about, is being in the right place at the right time and catching the eye of a few important people. And that's just kind of what happened, covering LSU for a while. I should be thanking LSU, since they gave me so much content and insane things to write about. It was a crazy 5 years, but it led me here kind of through Andy Staples, a former colleague of mine, about a year in at SI. He left me for the Athletic, but he got me here, and we were able to replace him with Pat Forty. And so it's been Pat and I rocking the SI team now for about a year and a half. So it's been a good ascension. Before LSU, I covered a bunch of SEC schools, hopped around. I covered Mizzou, covered Auburn, and was based in Jackson, Mississippi for a while, covered Jackson State actually, and in high schools and stuff. So kind of slowly climbed up the ladder, I guess you could say.
I think what I'm interested to know, especially because you've worked for, work covering some of these different like big time programs, Power 5 schools. Do you have a school in particular, and you don't have to give it if this will burn up a relationship with an SID someplace, but where do you think you got the best access, and who do you think was the tightest lipped?
Well, I would say in the region that I'm used to covering, when Gus Malzahn was at Auburn, it was pretty hard to get much in the way of interviews at Auburn. In fact, at some point I just gave up. I didn't go to Auburn at all. And I made a trip there about a month ago, actually, see Brian Harsin, because they're much more open. So Auburn was pretty tight. A lot of SEC schools are tight. And it is frustrating. Michigan, it might be the tightest, maybe the nation. The most open, I mean, anybody at the group of 5 pretty much is pretty open. They want coverage, they're going to want coverage. On the power level, for me, obviously LSU is very open, but that's because I have a lot of established relationships down there. But it's getting harder and harder these days. Twitter kind of made it even more difficult. just because people don't trust you as much or trust certain people, and it's become more difficult. But yeah, I would say those are, I would say that Michigan, most sports writers nationally would say that Michigan is probably the hardest place to get access to, and I would say the best is in anybody probably in the group of five, and some like lower level Power Five, and there are some SEC teams that are decent. Like Arkansas is pretty open, for instance. Mississippi State, Ole Miss to an extent are decently open as well.
So we, I guess, know each other, quote unquote, and this is the first time we're seeing each other face to face. So we know each other through both our time covering LSU. And I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the future of the LSU program, because obviously you go from a national championship to a bad season. There's nothing else you can say about it. A bad season last year. So much issues on campus right now at LSU. Is last season an aberration or part of a start of a downward trend? Is there too much heat at LSU for them to be competitive in the near future, or is that, like I said, an aberration and they'll be back to being an SEC power as early as next year?
Well, as you know, Seth, LSU does not hurt in athleticism and talent, so they certainly have the athletes and the talent to be very competitive or live up to most of LSU fan expectations. I think they have the talent to win 10 plus games, 11 plus games. Last year was a disappointment. I want to say they had 3 or 4 games that came down to the final play, and they lost 2 or 3 of them, I believe. So it certainly could have been 7-3, but I think we all know that wasn't a 7-3 team. I was probably a 5-5 team. So I don't think they're that far away. Again, with the athletes they have, I don't think they're ever really far away. We all kind of know how the defensive coordinator search went. And so a lot of interest I know is in the man they finally landed on in the end. It'll be interesting if he can, if he can get it done. Offensively, it sure seems like, they're trying to replicate, what they had 2 years ago, but they're missing in Joe Burrow. So I don't know what to expect from them. Like you mentioned, all this stuff going on around campus can't help. Just a lot of, obviously, all the sexual assault stuff, just all that stuff is, it doesn't help. You could probably do one or the other. You get really distracted by it. And not saying players, maybe more so coaches and administrators, you get distracted by it and focus maybe less on football stuff, or you can rally the troops kind of thing and use the cliche there and try to, hey, we'll show them. I am sure at Orgeron is preaching the latter.
Absolutely. It's funny actually having this conversation about LSU. The Mississippi State game to open the year obviously became almost like a meme in the college football world, as far as what it was, turning over that whole roster. I think people kind of get in their heads that turning over staffs and rosters kind of don't matter as much at the college level because we always think in terms of blue chips. But when I watched that game, the first thing I thought was, hey, new co-offensive coordinators, just Insminger, new defensive coordinator, new quarterback, a whole bunch of new guys playing. Clearly that had an effect. And this is something, that's not just LSU thing. I think in the article that you wrote about practice time that I just read, where you were talking about Navy and Kenny Mazzololo talking about the lack in practice time because of COVID and then all these changes that are happening with fall camp as well. So for you, when you're talking to coaches, I'm sure that if there's one thing that they're willing to open up and complain about, it's something like a rule change that's going to make their job harder. So when you were reporting on that story, what did you really walk away from with the changes as far as from the NCAA's perspective and from the coach's perspective as to how that may change the way that we view the sport?
Well, I kind of learned that the coaches typically, as you would expect, are unhappy with it. they, I think more so they just don't like to be told what to do and when to do it. So they want to be able to legislate and regulate their own practices, and they think they're competent enough to do it. And a lot of them are. But that rule, as one of the administrators told me, because the rule changes aren't a change for a lot of teams. I think I would say 50 to 60% probably already follow a lot of the changes that were made, which was a reduction, obviously, in contact days of camp, and then was the elimination of some of those straight line collision drills. A lot of people don't do those drills, or they do them very, very limited amount. And, I think the rule change was 9 full pad practices and 9 practices in shells and 7 in helmet only. The only real big change for, I'd say, 70% of teams is going to be those 7 helmet only. Most teams probably had 3, 4, 5 helmet only. So they did a lot of stuff in shells. But the rule, as one administrator told me, to get back to what I was saying, is targeted at that other 20, 30% that are doing straight line collision drills still, and that are having 15 to 20 days in full pads, or having 22 or 23 days in shells. Though it's targeting them. I think the effects of it will be maybe some sloppy play in September. But the thing is last year we had sloppy play. You mentioned Navy in September, because everybody was doing something different. Everybody should be doing the same this year. So it's going to be just sloppy play across the board. There shouldn't be any unfair advantages, I guess you could say. So that kind of probably wraps up that issue a little bit. It's not going to be a super change for a lot, but at least a quarter, a third of coaches are going to have to change. I'll say the biggest changes, one of the collision drills is the board drill, which is just when, 2 linemen usually line up within inches of each other. And coaches say it's more of a teaching, kind of fundamental instructional drill, and not the toughness type drill. So there's some real frustration around that, but there's an easy way around that. You just call a play, have a quarterback in the backfield, and call a play and line them up, and it's legal. So
right.
There's a lot of different ways around those things. So for most, not a huge change, but there's a targeted group for sure.
Right. I think I was maybe drawn more to this story, as a coach. This obviously is something I take a lot of interest in. I live in California, and we had a very truncated season, a very truncated kind of on-ramp to getting to the season. I can speak personally for the place that I coach at. We had a COVID scare that cut off some of our spring camp time that you would consider, so when I look at like different quotes and stories, as you do your reporting, where guys are concerned that people at the lower level, players at the lower level, programs at the group of 5 level may be at more of a lag because they might not be dealing with as polished of an athlete. I know this was something that I always was debating as a coach was, I'm dealing with 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, some of whom have not played football until they were in high school, and I think that I've had to kind of, take in new information as these studies come out. Do still have a belief that there is a certain amount of contact that you do have to acclimate the body. The same with like working in the weight room. There's a certain amount of weight training you have to get to be able to withstand the kind of beating you go through when you play football. But for you as a reporter, when you're hearing some of these quotes from whether it's administrators or coaches about these concerns, does that hold water to you, and why or why not?
Yeah, and I talked to a few group of 5 coaches who did bring up that they feel like they need more than 9 full padded practice, or even 18 total shells practices. They need all they can get because they have the 2-star, the 3-star that they have to prepare for game speed in collisions with the 4-star and 5-star. As early in the season, especially Power 5 and Group of 5s play quite a bit. So that is a really big concern for some of these smaller programs, and bigger programs too. It's just, these kids, some of them come from high schools where, they're not taught necessarily proper fundamentals. In the college game is so much faster that you really do have to prepare for collisions and hitting. And Navy was a great example last year where Ken decided to not have any contact during fall camp. And he realized very quickly that, his team wasn't ready for contact in that opener against BYU. And I think BYU was a better team anyway, but it certainly didn't help that they didn't have any contact at all. And that was kind of a good example of when a team doesn't have enough contact in camp and what the product can look like on the field. Now, I will say, they had zero contact, Ken did. Obviously, these rule changes are not going to put coaches in position to have, players have zero contact, but you could see that there might be a little drop off. And most coaches would tell me, it takes about 2 weeks worth of hitting for a team to really, get used to contact. And with them taking out, reducing the days, they feel like they lost up half a week or a week or so. They're just going to take a little longer, I think, in the fall camp for players to kind of get used to that contact.
So with all of what you're talking about and players, especially young players, not being able to ramp up into the season because they don't have this contact, we've already seen this past year, teams are not or less recruiting high school players, and they're looking at the transfer portal. So is that another step in the direction of more volume of the transfer portal compared to recruiting high school kids, with these new rule changes? Do you think that could be a road that's led down?
Sure. That's a real, a big, I guess, concern from coaches is that we're going to see high school kids. I guess the biggest, it's hurting. The portal is hurting the most group of high school kids, and I'm just completely botching up the English language. It's like Les Miles over here with the English language, but it is. It's really hurting the high school kids. And I wrote about it back in signing day, and then again when I was at the Final Four. Just the amount of kids in the transfer portal is alarming. And what's going to happen? And I used back in signing day, I used actually a former LSU player, Manny Netherly, who came in LSU as a receiver. They moved him to defensive back. He played a little bit in a rotational role, and then for about 2 years played with LSU. I think he was rotating in at cornerback in LSU's win over UCF in the Fiesta Bowl, and then after that spring he went to the portal. Before LSU won the national title, he went to the portal, and he never played football again. Never played a snap of football again because he didn't like some of the suitors. He had some suitors, but he didn't like them. He wanted something better, and never played again. So I think players are going to start realizing that is a thing, that there's not as many spots for them right now. And then it's going to level off. But back to your point is coaches are starting to develop college scouting departments. They always have, high school scouting departments and a high school recruiting coordinator. And you're going to start seeing, transfer portal coordinator, and in college scouting coordinator. And I think the most coaches I've talked to are going to still sign between 15 and 18 high school kids. And they're going to sign 7 to 10 or so transfers. And that's kind of, and you could see how the trickle down effect of that, a low 4-star or something that would normally maybe go to an LSU or something. Where now if LSU's going to take a transfer instead or something, then it kind of bumps you down, and the 3-star bumps down the 2-star, and it's tough for the high school kids. But that's the reality we're in right now.
I hear that. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about something else that you reported on, and that's been the conversation as the college football playoff selection committee and the college football playoff in general just kind of makes its preparations to be what's an inevitable expansion. So I wanted to ask, from your perspective, why it is. Is it as simple as this has been a cash cow, and the natural progression for a cash cow when a TV contract ends is to re-up and try to make it bigger? Or is there actually conversations having about the fairness or equity that comes with who gets to compete for a national title and who does not?
I think it's a lot of those things. I know we always want to talk about the money, and the money is always a big factor in everything. But there is such a big push from all corners of college football except maybe one corner, in expanding the playoff to include more teams and give more opportunities. There just is. It's coming. I talked to 10 of the 11 CFP management committee members, which are made up of the 10 commissioners and then Jack Swarbuck, the Notre Dame AD. And 8 of the 10 said they're open to expansion or for it completely. So they want to see more teams involved. I think some of them want to see games on campuses, early round games on campuses, and how kind of fun that would be. And then, of course, like you said, there is the money component, but also part of this is giving more teams opportunity to maybe have different teams in the national championship game, which we haven't had very often. 20 of the 28 spots so far that have been doled out in the playoff have gone to 4 teams: Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. So it's just adding more variety, and it's given the group of 5 a chance. These group of 5 teams, they start the season knowing they're not going to have a chance at the national title, and I think they want to change that.
So this is, like, I would imagine, is pretty inevitable, like Diante said. Do you see it as like a slow start at first, like maybe going to 6 and then 8 and then we'll see? Or is it like we are going, like, next time the changes, we're going to 12 or going to 16? Or like is it we're going straight to the big time, or are we going to do it incrementally?
There doesn't seem to be much appetite if you're going to go through all this, renegotiate contracts, to just add 2 more teams, because you're going to be right back at it 2 years later. So adding 2 more. So after talking to the commissioners and others around college football, I would say that either 8 to 12 is the number. And the big difference there, obviously, is you add in an extra round. You're giving buys to the top 4 seeds. So that's kind of the big difference in those 2. And adding a second round, an additional round, is tough because you're in a tight window in December. So that's what they're deciding on. And then, of course, one of the big things that they're going to argue over is automatic qualifiers, who gets them and how they're dispensed of, and then how many at-large teams do you have? But I get the feel it's 8 to 12, 8 or 12.
So one of the things that's really been interesting for me is what the college football playoff has done, culturally and, actually, like, concretely to the bowl season. So in your mind, and in your reporting, what are you coming away with as how this may affect the bowl season? Is this going to eat up more of the New Year's 6 slate? I know you mentioned maybe playing some games at the sites of some of these programs. I'm sure that there's a lot of interest for that as well. But I am interested in maybe your opinion on what do you think will be the best course of action and how this affects the rest of the bowl season.
Well, that's one of the biggest concerns among the power brokers is further diminishing of the bowl system, which we've seen diminish for a number of reasons. 1, attendance; 2, water down, too many bowls kind of thing. And 3, players opting out. And then the focus just being so much on the playoff. If you expand the playoff, it's just going to further hurt the bowls no matter what you do. Expand to 16, it's going to hurt them a lot. Expand to 8, it won't hurt them as much. So there is a big concern in further diminishing the bowls, and there's really no way around it. I think that in maybe 20 years we won't have very many bowls left. I feel like we're trending in the direction. As we just came back from Phoenix at the Fiesta Bowl Summit, and one of the administrators there said, it's okay sometimes to admit, like, you're a thing of the past, and the bowls are a thing of the past, he said. And so it does seem like we're drifting toward a playoff only, and it's probably going to just ease into that. But that is a big concern. And if you play early round games at campuses, obviously you can kind of keep the setup you currently have, where the New Year's 6 is in a rotation for the semis and the finals. But if you had a second round, I don't know how the bowls are involved. If you had really another round, I don't know how it would work, but I'm sure the New Year's 6 would try to be involved in some way. And you would think you would have some rotation like you have now for the semifinals. It's just the teams, the years that the New Year's 6, if you're a New Year's 6 bowl and you're not involved in the semis or the championship game, those years, if you have an 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be, instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team playoff, your game is going to be instead of the second, 8 to 12 team pla or third SEC team against the second or third Big Ten teams. You're going to have maybe the fourth SEC team against the fourth or fifth Big Ten team, and that's going to be the problem.
The hits literally keep on coming. From one boxing event to the next, they grow in excitement and anticipation. And this weekend is no different, with two of the sport's most respected fighters stepping in the ring Saturday night. And there is no better way to get in on all the action than with DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app. To celebrate this weekend's huge event, DraftKings Sportsbook is offering new users the opportunity to get 55-1 odds on either main event fighter to win this weekend. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code PFF when you sign up. For a limited time, all new users can bet $1 to win $55 on this weekend's main event. That's right. DraftKings Sportsbook is going all out for new users by offering them a chance to win $55 when placing a $1 bet on this weekend's big fight. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 years or older. New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In these uncertain times, life is full of questions like, when should I start thinking about life insurance? But however difficult these questions may be, Western and Southern can help you answer them. Backed by over 130 years of experience, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind. Western and Southern Financial Group, life insurance, retirement, and investments. Compensated endorser, products issued by member companies of Western and Southern Financial Group, Cincinnati, Ohio. I want you guys to remember that if you are listening to this PFF podcast, we have other great podcasts on our PFF podcast network, which covers, of course, the NFL, fantasy football, and this show, college. So you can recap the NFL draft with PFF Mike and PFF Austin on 2-for-1 Drafts, probably one of the best podcasts out there, in my opinion. You can check out Ian Hardett's fantasy football podcast and get a leg up on your league. I'm going to need it next year because I finished very poorly last season in fantasy football. And get all your 2021 betting content with the PFF forecast, another great podcast. So a lot of podcasts on the network. Make sure you tune into all of them. So there's a lot of talk right now, obviously, about the NIL laws and different states passing these bills at different times. I mean, you wrote about Florida maybe postponing passing the bill until 2022. So how is that going to work in terms of recruiting, in terms of so much part of the sport is our teams like, if let's say Florida doesn't, let's say they do postpone this thing till 2022, are there going to be a number of recruits that say, hey, I'm just not going to go to a Florida school because I know that in Georgia or somewhere else in Alabama, I can make this type of money here. Like, is that going to happen right away? And how is the NCAA going to deal with this? Like, it seems wild to me.
It is. I don't know that athletes, just kind of like cost of attendance, I don't know really that it's going to be that big of a factor, especially early on. I was talking to some coaches about that exactly, asking them, what during recruiting right now, during talks, like, is this coming up at all? And it is, but nobody knows anything about it, and nobody really understands it or understands the legislation. So you're not having like moms and dads really inquiring. And the NCAA is going to pass its own NIL legislation, and it's going to be similarly close enough to the state laws that I don't think you're going to have a big gap in one school from the other. If one school is operating under state law and another's not, coaches are going to use it in recruiting. I don't know it's going to really sway that many minds. Now, it'd be different if the NCAA didn't pass its own legislation, obviously, and you could have NIL and only the states that have passed its own laws. But that's not going to be the case. So, it probably, and I've been writing about it to death, and we'll probably make it too big a deal out of it. I don't know that it's going to be a real big determining factor. And it's just so early that people just don't know what this stuff means a lot. They're not reading state laws and stuff. And trying to find the differences, because there are differences in the state laws, and there are differences between the state laws and the NCAA legislation that they'll pass, but it's very minor. And I don't know if it's going to sway any minds. And then, in a few months, we'll have a little chaos in a way for a while, but in a few months we'll have a congressional, bill that'll be kind of everybody will be unified under.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that a lot of times the conversation that comes up around NIL, I think, is people kind of trying to prognosticate what the earning potential is for any particular athlete. I think what I'm more interested in right now as it stands is, what is the relationship going to be between the schools and this proposed marketplace that may exist for these players to be able to cash in on their name, image, and likeness? So our schools, our states having conversations with these schools about different kind of legal protections. Are there going to be different types of stipulations as far as like NIL rules, what kids can and can't do, where they can and cannot sign to in terms of like endorsement deals and things like that. I have a hard time believing there's going to be any kind of cap, but I know that in Georgia's bill that there is legislation in there that introduced that maybe a school could withhold a certain percentage of someone's earnings to redistribute to other players within the program. So where's everybody at, from a state by state perspective, as you've done your reporting, as far as how schools can kind of interact with this marketplace as well?
Right. So when it comes to these state laws and just NIL legislation in general, there are a few areas, areas to spotlight. And one of them is, can a athlete use a school's logos or marks in advertisements? And that varies by state. The NCAA legislation, I believe, leaves it up to the school. Either doesn't allow it or leaves it up to the school. I think they're still trying to decide that. But some states leave it up to the school. But a lot of states have said that it's not allowed. And if you leave it up to the school, a lot of times the school's not going to allow it. So that's one area. And actually, Louisiana's bill that's passing through its system is a little different than others, because it does allow athletes to use marks and logos if they pay a copyright fee. So it's a little different than other state laws, a little more open. The other area is, can athletes sign endorsement deals with companies that schools also have deals with, or can they sign deals with companies? Are they allowed to sign deals with companies that are competitors with whatever company that the schools have to deal with? And that's a tricky one. I think in the NCAA legislation, it partly either bans that or leaves it up to the schools. The same thing at the state laws. They're very varying a little bit. So a lot of these things, it's going to be up to the individual school and the school administrator. And believe me, just because of recruiting purposes, you're going to have a lot of schools allow athletes to use all this stuff and allow athletes, open, lift restrictions, because that will be used in recruiting. If you're, say you're an athlete trying to go to LSU and they're following Louisiana law, which allows you to use the logo and marks of LSU in your advertisements, and also allows you to sign with whatever company you want, no matter if they're signed with LSU or a competitor. And then you're thinking about Alabama, and you can't use school marks, and you can't sign with a certain amount of companies because they're a competitor with the companies that Alabama has deals with. So that would be the big determining factor. Those are the big, really determining factors. Everything else is pretty much the same. So those are kind of the key questions here.
Okay, well, before we get you out of here, you just spent time at Auburn with Brian Harsin. And like you said before, you had been around the Auburn program before with Gus Malzahn. So, I mean, it's early stages, of course, in the Harsin era. But what are the things that you've seen that are kind of different? Is there a lot of hope in the program? Like, can they turn it around? I know Diante is the biggest Gus Malzahn fan in the world, but was it time for a change? And how excited are they at Auburn going forward?
Yeah, well, one of the differences is I was able to visit there. But Gus is just closed off, and once you get into office with Gus, he's not the most exciting interview. So I never was around there as much. And I think it was my first job out of college was covering Auburn. But I covered now Cinder, Tommy Tuberville, which is weird to say still. But I think, Brian did such a great job at Boise. They just rolled, man. They were just so fun to watch too. And I went in that interview wanting to know, why would you leave that? It's his hometown. He just, he grew up there. He loved it. He went there. He played there. He coached there previously. He had this cushy job where, it's clearly the best recruiting territory out there, even over some Pac-12 teams. So you had this, why leave? And I think part of it was Brian wants a challenge, number one, and he's got it. Obviously, goes to the toughest conference and the toughest division, and maybe the toughest state, since Nick Saban's in that state too. So he wants a challenge, and two, he wants to try to compete for a national title, because what we were just talking about came up when I was talking to Brian, and that is group of 5 teams don't have a shot at the national title, and now he does, and he's pretty passionate about that stuff. So, he's got those guys working. I got to see some things there, and they are in early and they leave late. Certainly the off the field program has been kind of impressive to watch. They're opening up that new football facility, I believe, right next door to the current one. So there's a lot of excitement around the program.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Auburn's going to win the national title. So, all right. Ross, thank you for being on the program. You can find Ross at si.com and at Ross Dellenger on Twitter. So, Ross, thanks for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, guys, no problem at all.
Much appreciated.
All right. That was our interview with Ross Dellenger. Hope you guys liked it. I had a good time talking to an old friend, and I'll see you guys next week.